Welcome to another coffee tasting. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor, and today we are tasting another coffee by Stumptown Coffee. Today we are trying the Bies Penantan, which is a coffee from the northern highlands of Sumatra Island. And so with this coffee, we're going to learn a lot about the history of Indonesian coffee, how coffee made its way to Indonesia from Dutch colonialism, and we're going to learn a little bit about the flavor notes that we get from this region of Indonesia and why we get those flavor notes. So, for those of you guys who are joining me for the first time, welcome. It is an honor to have you. And for those of you who are returning, welcome back. It is an honor to have you return and learn a little bit more about coffee culture, and it really shows your passion for coffee. So, thanks everyone for joining me in today's coffee tasting. Let's go ahead and get this started. So for those of you who are joining me for the first time, we like to brew our coffee three different ways. We like to brew our coffee on a pour-over, Chemex, and a French press. That way we really get to explore the different flavor notes of the coffee. And so with the pour-over, we'll have a paper filter. So we're going to absorb a lot of the sediments, but a little bit of the oils are going to pass through, giving us a brighter cup of coffee. With the Chemex, we have a triple paper filter. So it's going to absorb a little bit more of those oils along with the sediments. So we're going to end up with a more balanced cup of coffee. And with the French press, it is a fully submerged cup of coffee with a coarser grind. And so we're going to end up with more sediments, more oils. So the flavor of our coffee is going to be that much more intense. It's going to be very similar to the Chemex, but with the flavor dial turned up. And so let's go ahead and get this coffee tasting started. So first we're going to try the pour over. So with the pour over, we have that single paper filter, so we're absorbing those sediments. And then we're absorbing some oils as well, but not all the oils. Some of the oils are going to make its way through, and that is going to impact the flavor of the coffee, giving us a brighter flavor than what you would normally get in a French press or a Chemex. And it's because of those oils that make its way through are going to give us a brighter, more citrusy cup of coffee, or in this case, we're going to get a bright cedary flavor. So initially, right off the bat, we're getting that bright cedar notes. It's fairly intense, but not overwhelming. And then as those cedar notes start to wash away, we get those spice notes. So we're left with a slightly subtle spice flavor on the center of our tongue as those bright cedar notes on the sides of our tongue start to wash away. Really, really good. I'm not a big fan of that bright cedary flavor at the very beginning, but those subtle spice notes that we get as the palate starts to clear is very nice, very, very smooth. So now we're going to try the Chemex. With the Chemex, we get a triple paper filter, and with the triple paper filter, that means we're absorbing more sediments and more oils. And so with the extra amount of oils being absorbed through the paper filter, we're not going to end up with as bright of a cup of coffee as we did with the pour over. So this, we're going to get a more subtle cup. So immediately right off the bat, we're getting that cedar flavor, but it's not as bright, not as intense as it is on the pour over. But we are getting some of those spice notes right off the bat as well. So we're getting that cedar flavor and the spice notes together at the very initial sip. And then as the palate starts to clear, we're left with a very subtle spice flavor. Not as intense spice flavor as the pour over. With the pour over, the spice flavor lingering, the lingeriness of the spices kind of gives you somewhat of a dry palate. While here we're not getting that dry palate like we do on the pour over, we're just left with that subtle spice flavor in the center of our tongue. It's not overwhelming, it's very smooth and subtle. Really, really good. So now with the French press is a fully submerged cup of coffee. It has the longest contact time with the water, but then it also has the coarsest grind, so there's not going to be as much surface area for the coffee to brew from. And so there's kind of like a balancing act where these have a finer grind, but they're going to have a faster brew time. So there's that balancing act, and then also the different amount of sediments and oils is going to impact the flavor. So with the French press, we're getting that very intense, bright, cedary flavor in the very beginning as well. But then also we're getting an intense spice flavor along with it. So while we have the intense cedar notes on the pour over, and then we don't get those spice notes till the palate clears away, and the Chemex, we kind of get both of them hand in hand, but then both flavors aren't very intense. The French press, we're getting a very intense, bright, cedary flavor alongside those really strong spice flavors. And it almost gives it a cinnamon woodsy spice. So with the Chemex, or sorry, with the French press, it would go really well with maybe like an extra shake of cinnamon and some oat milk in there to help bring out that cinnamon, that spice flavor with the woods, with the cedariness, and then that oat milk will kind of give it that creamy flavor. So I think that this coffee would be great with a little bit of cinnamon and oat milk just because of the flavor notes that it has on its own would really pair well with that cinnamon oat milk flavor. Really, really good. So now we're going to learn a little bit about Indonesia's coffee and how coffee made its way to Indonesia, and then how the processing methods in this region affect the flavor. So with this particular part of the world, they have a wetter climate. Different the demographic of this area doesn't necessarily allow them to do like a sun-dried method or a fully washed method. And so with this coffee, they use what's called a wet hold method. And so what they do is they take the cherries, the coffee cherries, and they put it into a hand cranked depulper. And what this does is it pulls the cherries off the beans, and then it just leaves a little bit of the fruit left with the parchment paper that protects the bean, and then they put that into a bath and they let that ferment for less than a day. And then also, normally when coffee growers, when they dry their beans, it can take a couple weeks to dry. With this coffee, it takes less than, with this drying method, it takes less than 24 hours. And the reason why they do this method is because coffee grows so fast in this region of the world that they really have to export their coffee quickly. And so what they do is they dry their coffee to around 50%, which is much more, has a lot more moisture than what dryers typically dry their beans to. And so when they export their beans are still swollen from the amount of moisture that are inside them. And so when they export their beans, they pretty much let the middleman continue the drying process and then roast their beans. And so that's the method that they choose from this in this region of the world. And the reason why they choose this method is because of the area and the climate of this region of the world doesn't allow them to do some of the other processing methods that other coffee regions choose. And because of this processing method, that's what causes the really woodsy, spicy notes and earthy notes that is very typical to a Sumatra or Indonesian coffee. And so when you drink an Indonesian coffee or a Sumatra coffee and you get those strong, woodsy, spicy notes like a cinnamon spice or an allspice or even like a peppery spice, the reason why you're getting those notes is because of the processing method alongside with what's in the ground providing the nutrients. And so really cool to learn about what impacts the flavor of our coffee. And so now we're going to learn a little bit about how coffee made its way to Indonesia. So coffee first made its way to the island of Java in 1696, but the first crops failed due to flooding, and so the Dutch governor of Malabar, which is in India, sent another set of shipment of seeds in 1699, and then it was then that coffee actually thrived. And in 1711 was the first shipment of coffee beans, and in 1718 exports reached around 2,000 pounds a year. And so coffee really expanded in this region. It really thrived and grew a lot, but it came at a cost because the Dutch colonialism and the Dutch governor made a lot of money off of coffee exports, but the people of Java and East Timor and other coffee growing regions in this area, when it first began, didn't make a lot of money because it was forced labor. Their land was pretty much taken from them, or they were pretty much told to grow a specific crop, or the land was going to be taken from them. So in order to keep their land, they had to pretty much cooperate with the Dutch colonialism. And so a lot of people in this area switched to growing coffee because they were forced to, and then they also didn't make as much money as they should have because of the forced labor and the government, the Dutch government taking the money from the people. And so with coffee in this region, it starts off as a fairly negative story, but then as time goes on, we begin to grow and make changes. And so what's nice is the this part of the world has changed a lot in terms of fair wages and fair trade, and other things like that. And so it was after World War II is when the people of Indonesia, specifically the Aceh region of Sumatra, gained their independence from Dutch colonialism. And it was the independence of Dutch colonialism that really allowed them to thrive even more. They continued to grow coffee, and in the 1850s is when coffee actually started to make its way into the Sumatra region of Indonesia, and the Aceh region, which is the northern west highlands of Sumatra, was the second region of Sumatra to begin growing coffee. And so, with the fair wages and fair trade and the just abundance of coffee and just the fact that it thrives in this part of the world, provides a really strong economy for the people of Indonesia. And so with Sumatra and East Timor, 80% of their economy relies on coffee exports. And that's super important because with fair wages and fair trade, a lot of the farmers in this region of the world are seeing a lot more of that money than when they did when they were being forced to grow coffee. And the best part about it as well is the fact that they can take the cherries of the coffee and they can put that back in the ground to refertilize the soil and put nutrients back into the ground so that they can continue to grow coffee. And so even though coffee in this part of the world started off as a negative story, the changes and evolutions around the world and the practices that we do in terms of trading with other countries has helped the people of Indonesia and specifically the island of Sumatra grow financially and gain a stronger economy. And so with the fair trade and proper wages for farmers in this part of the world, it has really allowed them to grow their facilities, grow more coffee, and make it more sustainable so that they can create a better livelihood for themselves and for future generations. And so this is just a true inspiration for how coffee can shape different parts of the world through growth and economically and society. And so we have societal growth where views and opinions and how we treat other people are changed, and then we have economical growth because of those other changes. The society changes allowed for the economic growth because we as a society, we demand fair trade for our farmers, and because we demand fair trade for our farmers, it's allowing for a stronger economy for those farmers so that they can make their land much more hospitable, and so they can continue to grow more coffee and make more money in the future. And so that's what's so important about this coffee, and what's so so inspiring about it is the fact that we can start from a negative story, and through changes and adaptations throughout the world, we're able to help communities across the world grow and evolve and create a stronger economy. And coffee is just one of the many examples of how we can make that happen through fair trade, exports, imports, and coffee. So that is the story of Sumatra, Indonesian coffee, and the Aceh Bies Penantan, and how coffee affects the people of Aceh, and how they have come a long way from Dutch colonialism to their independence and gaining a strong economy. So super cool, super inspiring to learn about their story and just have that much more respect for the coffee that comes from Indonesia. So thank you all for joining me in today's coffee tasting. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did enjoy today's coffee tasting, go ahead and hit the link above. That is going to be a list of videos that I have done in the past, and the link down below is just going to be a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. So thanks again everyone for joining me in today's coffee tasting, and I hope your coffee was just as delicious as mine was.